Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, Supply Chain Insights, the podcast for your supply chain leader who is on the go and wants to be in the know. And now, your host, Lora Cecere.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights. My name is Lora Cecere. I'm the founder of Supply Chain Insights, and this podcast series is designed for the supply chain leader who's on the go but wants to be in the know. Today I'm interviewing Dean Ocampo, and Dean is the Senior Director of Marketing at Aera Technologies, and Aera is one of the cognitive computing decision support tools that's in the market. Dean, welcome to the show.
Hey, Laura, great to be here. I've always been a big fan, so this is exciting.
Oh, well, so glad. We're getting ready for the Global Summit, and what we're trying to do is ask all the technologists that are there to give us their insights about Supply Chain 2030. But before I do that, tell me a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Aera, just so that people know who they're talking to and have some perspective.
Sure. Just very quickly about myself. I consider myself more of a technology guy. I've been in Silicon Valley for about 20 years now. I jokingly say that I've crawled myself up the OSI model. I actually started in ATM, frame relay, ISDN hardware. It's a little bit of the supply chain background there, but I got into the IP space, the .com thing. Then I decided to specialize in IT security for about 10 years because I thought there was a lot of technology innovation there. Then I started to see the technology kind of flatten out a little bit. And from there, I actually had a friend who pointed to the supply chain market. And it wasn't actually something that I was interested in, but I actually was interested to do a quick survey. And I thought it was a very interesting space ripe for innovation. So I've been in supply chain now for about 6 years, and part of it in the visualization control tower space. And I've been very lucky on being able to interface with C-levels and VP levels and supply chain to really go through some transformation projects. And now I'm kind of crawling up even farther into the cognitive space with Aera Technology. I can also give an overview of Aera for those folks who aren't familiar. Cutting beyond buzzwords, typically the way I like to see it is, what we're trying to do at Aera is trying to solve a slightly different problem. And I do compare and contrast this to some of my experience in control towers and visualization. Because it seems to me that a lot of the focus of conversations has been assuming that, if we get the right data in the right format and cleanse it and get it to a person, an alert, what have you, that person will figure out the right decision to make and involve the other folks and workflows, et cetera. Aera's taking a slightly nuanced approach above that, which is asking the question, there's a lot of very sophisticated decisions that are actually repeatable. And now, given the state of how we can process data, how we can use machine learning and use that in the sequence of events, can we actually have the system start taking over some of those thought processes and relieve folks from having to do those day-to-day, while they may be kind of repeated, they are sophisticated, allow the system to take over the driving and let the folks in the organization start kind of thinking about, where am I trying to go from this versus trying to figure out, do I need to be in first gear, do I need to be in second gear, do I need to figure out what my traction looks like on this rainy day, and let the system take over for it. All right, hopefully that was enough, Laura.
Well, so many people are driving blind when it comes to decision support and supply chain planning. How many clients do you have now at Aera? And can you tell me a story that you're proud of?
Oh, gosh. Well, I will also tell you that I'm relatively new to Aera, so I'm very proud of the technology. I think there's a couple of things. For me, fundamentally, the thing I'm proud is this stuff is real. So like when I first was talking to Aera, the fact that a platform could come in and say, hey, Dean, I've got a recommendation for you, almost seemed far-fetched. In fact, I went through quite a bit of time saying, prove it to me. And what I'm proud is I'm actually seeing customers who are using this where there's a system taking in information, doing forecast, backcast, figuring out lead time, using multiple algorithms, and then using a recommendation. And they've actually turned over some of the day-to-day decision-making. So it's interesting to see some large companies in the multi-billion actually saying, you know what, for anything below $50,000, you go ahead and make the decision.
Pretty cool, eh? Now, when we think about Supply Chain 2030, I recently wrote a blog post on LinkedIn about 7 reasons why I got my predictions wrong for 2020. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to get them right for 2030, but I over forecasted the adoption of new technologies. I was so excited about the potential that, I thought we would be far further along in adoption and, the self-driving, autonomous supply chain. And I've actually been disappointed in the rate of adoption. So tell me what you think Supply Chain 2030 looks like, and tell me your perspective on the last decade.
Oh yeah, gosh, that's a very huge topic. So what I tried to do is put down a kind of a few guesses so that in 10 years we could make fun of my guesses. But there are a few things I was thinking about. So one is, if I make some predictions, I think probably no surprise, the ramifications of, sometimes it's called the Amazon effect is going to roll over in supply chain. I don't necessarily think that's the right way to look at it. I think a lot of it's driven by the fact that the buying patterns are dramatically changing, and that's driving change in the supply chain. For example, there's study after study where millennials are bifurcating their buying patterns, where they will spend a considerable amount of time going budget shopping to the Costco on the day-to-day items, but there is a segment they're willing to pay premium prices for on an experience. And that means not just the traditional brands, but brands that now interact with me in a very interactive way, not just recommending, but taking feedback, often customization, giving me very close personalization. So I think you're going to see, I think in the supply chain, it's going to be harder to sit that middle ground where I can have my cake and eat it too. So I think a lot of supply chains are going to figure out, am I truly going to try and do the Amazon model where I'm going to get to that really expected delivery, et cetera. But I also think probably one of the biggest things, you're going to be supply chains are going to become uber nimble, uber personalization. They're going to figure out how to do that satisfy that market. So I think a lot of that then is going to drive, part of why I'm in this space is I think cognitive automation is going to play a huge role in helping that transformation, because when you get on these supply chains trying to optimize that level, there's pretty sophisticated amount of coordination to get there. And it's part of the continuation of, the struggles have been the past 10 years of even today, like, why are we just finally getting to the point where we can see data? Let's call that together. Okay, now how do we use models to get around it, or models to build predictions and then figure out my actions are? So I think you're going to get cognitive automation is going to come in and start taking over these data collection, data analysis, and recommendations for these business outcomes. For those two bifurcated models. And then what I think is going to be interesting is it's then going to allow folks in supply chain to start thinking about, we're getting huge shifts in the market, so let's think about different business models. Let's start to think about our brand is 150 years old. Can I apply that to these millennials and give them an experience that Amazon doesn't? So I think cognitive automation will play an interesting role in both getting to the optimization, but as well as freeing up users to start thinking about kind of what we should be doing to really innovate our business models. So that was the kind of the second prediction on cognitive automation. I also think part of the extension of that is when you get into the later part of the next 10 years, I think cognitive automation is actually going to become kind of its own distinct thing. So today, my clients are basically mirroring human thought processes in cognitive automation. But I think what's more interesting is the folks who've been around longer are seeing how different automated processes are actually connected together. And so these are starting to suck up uber skill processes. So I think there's a bigger question about what should a skill or cognitive process look like when you don't necessarily have to have the same human outlook. And that's where we can start looking at more sophistication. It's actually where things like neural algorithms become interesting. Oh, sorry, separate topic. All right. My third prediction is starting to look at some of the clients. When I start looking at my clients who put cognitive automation and they really have gotten sophisticated in sensing information from the customers faster and incorporating into their models, and then also looking backwards historically in performance, et cetera, they're getting really, really good at exercising execution, agility, et cetera. I'm going to guess at some point our clients are going to get together and realize, you know what, there really is no specific supply chain per se. I'm actually a supplier to you, you're a supplier to someone else. Why don't we create a little bit of a federation, and let's start exchanging information, right? So my third prediction is we're going to start seeing what I call cognitive federations. So my guess is we'll first see it on a data exchange. So we'll tie our cognitive processes together so that the output and the signals coming from one supply chain will pass down to the others, the forecast, et cetera, will pass up from them, and they'll use it as a way to kind of fine-tune what they're targeting for. Now, what I think is more interesting is these systems now could actually start doing some economic bartering. So I think the next wave after that, potentially in the end of the 10 years, is now our federations will exchange things together. Where, you know what, why don't you go out buy this on my behalf, or I will cut you a certain better deal on this if you can cut me another deal over here. Well, that one decision may not be economically viable on itself. By the whole acting together, the federation will be interesting. So I think at the end of 10 years, we'll actually start seeing cognitive federations exchanging information, doing a little bit of bartering. Not to do it aside, but I don't know, did you ever see, Laura, there was an interesting exercise Facebook did a few years ago about having two machine learning processes talk together and do some bartering. Did you ever see that?
Yeah, I would just be happy if people would connect in a meaningful way, much less the autonomous supply chain. I'm shocked at how little direct interface we have. Most of the data is going into portals, which is sort of a dead-end street, and people are investing in enterprise systems, not really in value networks, and I'm so disappointed in that. But yeah, I did see that experiment.
Yeah, that was fascinating. You had to get two systems started bartering together. It made a bunch of news because they were talking about AI taking over, and it was just, actually they created their own language to do bartering, and that sort of made me think of, you know what, it's going to be an obvious extension to have our cognitive networks talk together. All right, so that was my third prediction. My fourth is a bit of an observation in Silicon Valley. So, we do quite a bit of machine learning, artificial intelligence in our platform as well as our customers. But I also know through my friends and this looking at the market is I literally cannot swing a dead cat and not hit another AI platform vendor. So my guess is with all the funding I'm seeing in AI, and I'm seeing very similar technologies and products, that there's going to be a natural consolidation. And it feels to me like that typical hype trough cycle. Like we're definitely at the hype, and I think we're going to see a trough fairly soon. And it's just hard for me not to imagine that in the next couple of years, there's going to be a huge amount of consolidation in the AI space. Like I just don't see how many just pure play AI platforms are going to exist. Which started making me think about the kind of the next prediction, which was, I think we'll see that consolidation, but I think we'll avoid the AI winter, which has plagued the industry previously. I think just the amount of funding that has gone into AI, the overall commoditization of the algorithms and the platforms and availability, and how many folks in the enterprise software are building those into the platform, that there's no way that AI and ML is going to go away in the traditional AI winter. I think you're just going to see consolidation. And in fact, if anything, it's actually become more interesting, which was, I started to think about, what does that mean for data scientists in the organization? So I think the other subtlety is, right now when I talk to clients, you get some very smart folks in the data science group, but it's the conversations in the organization that struggles quite a bit because the organization is not familiar with data science. They don't know where to apply it. There's some projects that go only AI on its own as an end goal. I think we're going to likely also see a lot of those AI projects where that was the end goal or the main reason are just going to fail because they just didn't have, there was two things. They didn't have a business focus and they didn't have the expertise. I do think, though, again, a part of the AI and ML built into the culture, built into the educational system and avoiding the AI winter, we're going to see a fair amount of folks coming out from schools with data science backgrounds or just engineering backgrounds who are familiar with data science who will actually continue the renaissance in the enterprise space. So over time, actually going to see it's probably going to become more interesting in the enterprise because you're going to have more folks who are conversant in AI. And I think actually you're going to move away from just AI, ML only projects, but the net percentage of projects that are involving AI and ML becomes higher. So I think it's actually become interesting even in the terms of vendor consolidation. And then my last prediction is a little bit kind of an extension of what you talked about. I actually don't see the IT architecture changing dramatically over the next 10 years. And, as much as I sit in Silicon Valley and I want to say that it's going to be a tectonic shift, I think given we've already made a lot of the moves into the cloud since 2008, et cetera, those architectures are pretty well established at this point, and there's still a lot of untapped potential there. So if I look at just all the services that are coming out from the cloud providers, and I start thinking about this new move into microservices platforms and doing this flexibility, you've got vendors in there who are now mediating conversations and APIs between other clouds and other enterprises. I think easily for the next 10 years, the IT stack that we've got put together has tons of runway. Where I think things are going to shake out, I think there's two things. So one is the topic of data lakes. I think there's going to be a rationalization between IT and the business over the next few years. Right now, I'm observing a very big mismatch into the expectation from the business of what's going to come out of a data lake versus IT. I think what we're going to find is data lakes are going to have a big presence in organizations, but there's going to be better rationalization of where they're good at. So the concentration of data lakes will be closer to the intellectual property of the business, closer to the core of the business, but they'll be rationalized for the fact of things that are common processes where you want to start thinking about best practices, or they're inherently involving data sets beyond the organization. Those will go to some other process capabilities, and so you have data lakes conversing with something else. So I'm expecting data lakes to be better rationalized and not necessarily be all, end all, and having the miscommunications they are today. Also along those lines, we're starting to think about the transactional systems, and this is maybe more of an economic observation where, interesting, every department has a big transactional system, ERP system, TMS, WMS system, and I think, no surprise, every vendor is trying to figure out how to get that to tell a larger story, and you're seeing it in the visualization space. My guess is in 10 years, there's going to be much more rationalized view of the limits of the transactional systems. And just my observations more economically, my guess is the fact that most transactional systems have gotten to a certain size, they're now doing technology innovation by acquisition. I'm seeing more portfolio managers, acquisitions of mid-tier companies, that I'm going to guess that there'll be a limit to how far enterprises will expect transactional systems to start being an innovative process. So I'm going to guess that in 10 years, we'll be thinking more about transactional systems, more on cost optimization and stability, and we'll start thinking about, and again, this is my bet, is starting to look at innovation in platforms like cognitive automation, something that can cut across different systems, let the transactional systems do what they do well, but let the innovation happen at a space that can actually cut across this and bring some new technologies that actually play well with it. So those are my 6 predictions for the next 10 years.
So how do we get ready? What's your recommendation for folks?
I always say don't panic. I'm actually quite simple. We keep looking at this as a technology exercise, and I absolutely don't think it's a technology exercise. Whenever I talk to a client, as much as I do really get excited by cognitive technology, I think what you need to do is very quickly focus on a use case, and then the use case drives everything else. There's almost a limited number of things you can apply cognitive technology to. Things like available promise, things like safety stock optimization, things about procurement automation. It's almost endless. The point is, pick a specific business problem to have everyone rally around. Then it becomes clear which processes you're starting to model within the cognitive processes, which then also become very clear on what data sets that you start pulling in as well. And it suddenly becomes a very reasonable and manageable problem because you've defined the space. And because it's around a business problem, I now have probably got the incentive structures in place so that my middle managers and my upper managers are aligned because my incentive structures are there as well. And I also have something accountable to hold the vendor to, so it's not too nebulous. So I just say pick a business problem that you know you're having a problem with. And sometimes it's actually interesting. Pick a business problem that you feel like you've run out of options on, and think about bringing in cognitive automation to think about a way to do new math. The way I've explained it to one client was, imagine you've always been working on Newtonian physics, but imagine now I suddenly have quantum physics. Is there something now I could do to start looking into inventory optimization that doesn't have that typical automatic trade-off between service and the cost that comes with buffer? So that's my general advice. Pick a specific business problem and go with it.
Well, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you at the Global Summit.
Me too. My pleasure. Thanks, Laura.
All right. Until then, bye now.